Okay, so why don't we get started? Can't even speak today, the policy committee meeting. It is Monday, April 27th at 6 p.m. We're doing this virtually per the governor's executive order number 7B. The first item, I'll get right to the agenda, is simply to call to order. Item number 2 is to act on policy committee minutes 2.1 from February 24th, 2020. So does anybody have any comments or questions, revisions or additions for the minutes?
No comments.
Nothing. Okay. Then would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Have a second? Kristen, a second? Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. So we're going to move on to item number 3, which is review of the temporary Board of Education policy revisions due to the shutdown. And you all should have the exhibit in front of you. As you can see, it's a kind of a long list. So Jason and I met the other day just briefly to review the agenda and asked that we could hopefully get through the agenda items first. And then if folks have, obviously we'll discuss and have question or comment, but just to at least for the essence of time so we can make sure we get through all of them, because that's what's most critical. And reserve anything, but like, if there's absolutely something critical, of course, we can pause and discuss it. But if we could just let Jason kind of run through the items, then we can, like I said, review and discuss afterwards. So Jason, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, everyone. As you're probably aware, in the last couple of weeks since we've been shut down, we've had a number of different provisions that have come through in a number of different areas. You've had the governor issuing close to, if not 30 or so executive orders. CABE has come out with a number of recommendations in terms of possible policy revisions or suspensions. We've also had guidelines presented to us from the Connecticut State Department of Education, as well as some decisions that when I looked at the policy book, we need to make locally regarding some timelines that we have vested in our policy and regulations. So that sort of serves as the framework for tonight. So what I did is I went through the policy book several times. I then reviewed that, and I want to thank both Paul and Terry for helping me. We went through and looked at some of these items that I had ticketed or flagged, and talked about each one, and they were a huge help at creating this document with me. So I want to thank them for that. And what you have in front of you is really a list of the policies and regs in order as they're presented in the policy manual that we either should look at revising or suspending or waiving, depending on what's written in there and what the guidelines that we've been given speak to. So I'm just going to start at the top of the list and go down. And then if you have any questions at the end, certainly feel free to ask, and we can answer them as best we can. So does that work?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
So starting at the top, Community Relations Series is the 1000 series in the policy manual. Policy 1138 speaks to public participation at board meetings. I noted that that policy, when I say revise, should really align with Executive Order 7B, which set a series of provisions or guidelines to having virtual meetings now by the Board of Education. So simply what we're asking there is that policy reflect now or go under the auspices of Executive Order 7B. 1346 is the use of school facilities. That's suspended. We obviously are not in open session right now. We're not renting the building out. So that is shut down for the period of the shutdown. I didn't see any changes in the administrative series, so we can skip over that section. I had three provisions that I noted in the business and non-instructional operations side, which is the 2000 series. 3314 speaks to bidding requirements. You know, the process there where the board authorizes an individual to go, like in this case, maybe Cliff, to go out and go through the bidding process, then come back to the board. CABE is now recommending that the Board of Educations delegate the bidding process to the superintendent in the event that the board is unable to achieve a quorum because of illness and or the time needed. So we're looking at that as a local decision to give Dr. Freeman the authority to take on the bidding process himself if needed.
We're expecting to include language in that that says in consultation with the board chair. That's not something that I ever intend to do individually, but if we can't pull a quorum of the board together, that after consulting with Katie, that we may see a need to do something along those lines. We haven't seen that to date.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And you'll see that noted in the action item 3 or 2 later on in the document. 3718 is the provision for free and reduced lunches, and you're probably thinking, why is that on there? The concern I had in that section of policy and regulations is not the fact that we have free and or reduced lunches available, but there is a element in there that speaks to the financial obligation of students and the collection of accounts that have gone negative. And I just wanted to draw attention to the board to 3718 as something that we might want to consider amending or waiving for a period of time during the shutdown, considering the financial implications that the shutdown has had on our families. And that really is the same for 3724, which is meal charging. The personnel series is the 4000 series, excuse me. You'll notice that 4114 speaks to recruitment and selection. Part of that policy talks about fingerprinting prospective employees. That has been temporarily suspended through Executive Order 7E with that decree. So I just wanted to note to the board that if we do hire anybody within the next few weeks, that is going to be delayed until we can have people fingerprinted. 4118, health examinations for new employees. Again, we have a provision in our policy and regulations that has that set for 30 days. I'm going to ask that be waived until a time that can be scheduled, because right now doctors' offices are not seeing individuals for wellness visits beyond emergencies and anything else. So I just want to note that was a time provision that I'd like waived. 4137, the evaluation athletic coaches. We're looking to suspend it as a local decision because obviously right now in the spring season, there is no season at this point in time. And we're asking obviously that there's nothing to evaluate with these individuals and that be suspended.
One of the executive orders waived the evaluation of teaching staff, but it didn't specifically name coaches. And so this would be a local adjustment to put it in alignment with the executive order.
Thank you, Paul. 4152 on the next page, or at least on what I have as my next page, is staff development. We have met our staff development hours for the year, which I believe by policy is 18. So this really speaks to the Executive Order 7C and also the guidelines we've received from the Connecticut State Department of Education that waives the educator evaluation and support plan for this school year. So there are many provisions within that policy and regulation that speaks to the evaluation plan and so forth, and forming committees related to that, which we do have active, we would have to do that virtually, but the plan itself has been suspended, so that would follow the executive order. As many of you are aware, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act came out fairly early in the shutdown process. That impacts FMLA, which is policy 4172 and 4272A. All that I'm asking there is we note that we're amending the FMLA process to align with the FFCRA provisions that come through, that were sent out, I believe, through the Department of Labor. There's a series of student-related provisions that we reviewed. We'll start with 5118 and 5122, which speaks to both local authority and some guidelines we've received from the Connecticut State Department of Education in terms of waiving the attendance policies that we have in place, the excuses that parents, I don't want to say excuses, but that's the way it's written in policy. It speaks to truancy as well. I do want to note with 5122, which is the truancy piece, that we are still actively engaging with students. If we don't hear from students in a period of time, the principals reach out to the family. We notify the appropriate authorities if we need to in regards to that. It doesn't waive the truancy, it doesn't excuse us from following through on it. It just gives us a broader parameter in which we can look at the attendance issue within the district. 5218 really speaks to what we're going to talk about in 6314, which is the grading policy, which Paul will talk a little bit about. I flagged 5218 only because there's a piece in it related to specific grades of students, especially at the middle level. And with some of the options we're going to have available to us that might be a pass-fail option, I just wanted to make sure that the policy reflects that if students do have on their teacher record a pass, that's the equivalent of a grade. I know that's probably a minutia issue, but it was something I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss. 5230, the high school graduation exercises. I would like to note there that there's a piece there that requires students to satisfy all of their financial obligations. What I'm asking the board to recognize in that domain is we'll do everything we can to collect whatever financial obligations that students may have. But I think that considering, again, the economic times that we're in, we need to be sure that that doesn't prevent anyone from graduating from the district. The instruction series is the 6000 series. I want to note a change. It was a mistake on my part. The policy number 6010 really should be 6110. School calendar. I believe, Paul, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're just under the 180-day requirement. Well, we at
Depending on how you count, but we will have 179 days, the way that I'm choosing to count. There may be some discrepancy between distance learning and supplemental material days, but we're going to report 179 days of contact to the state.
Which we have, Paul has the authority to do based on Executive Order 7E, which waived the 180-day requirement. 6310 speaks to graduation requirements. The two elements of the graduation requirements that we need to waive, as suggested by Mr. Macente and Ms. Chaff, is the community service hours component and the statewide assessments. The statewide assessments have been waived by Executive Order 7C. the community service components would be a local decision. 63-4.
Katie?
Go ahead, Paul.
No, Katie's looking to.
Sorry, quick question. Would that apply, with 6310 graduation requirements, the community service and the statewide assessments for seniors this year, for seniors and juniors this year, upon senior? A statewide assessment applies to their junior year, does it not?
Well, for the high school students, it says that you must have participated in. So most of our kids will have completed one in their junior year.
Okay.
But if we have a senior who for some reason did not complete an SAT
Okay.
last year, we would be requiring them to do so this year or refusing to graduate.
Okay.
And so with all of these, we're going to ask you to the executive orders to a certain degree supersede a number of our policies. We're going to have a conversation about whether we want to waive our policies or just know that an executive order outranks us. For the local ones where an executive order does not impact, we're going to suggest that we simply temporarily waive those policies until such time as we return to schooling physically. That way you can take one action. You don't have to take another action to put them all back into place. We don't have to wordsmith every single item, and it would only therefore apply, we hope, to current seniors up until June 17th. If we discover that we won't be back in time in September or back in a recognizable way come September, we'll revisit that decision and adjust it differently or individually at that time. But that's going to be our recommendation to you at the end of the list.
Okay. So I guess the follow-up is that this year's juniors are not taking that statewide assessment now. So we may have to think about what happens for them in their
Next year.
senior year.
And we'll be taking guidance from SDE, right? SDE will be coming out with either a directive or at least guidance on what to do for next year's seniors. And they're going to be looking to the universities. Are the universities willing to say, we're not so interested in SATs anymore? Are we going to go back to voluntary on Saturdays? We'll take some guidance. And will they be asking to have Connecticut SAT Day next year seat both juniors and seniors? That is going to be changed between now and next March.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Jason.
No, never.
Good question.
I do want to point out that I did have a conversation with Rick and Julia about the quality point averages, which are part of graduation requirements, and they noted that the system that they're putting in place, are proposing to put in place for grading this year, will not impact the quality point averages piece. So if you had a question about how that was going to apply later on, we should be all set with that. Paul, do you want to speak to 6314, the grading system?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And we're gonna do this again on Wednesday evening, and we'll have a proposal for you in writing for Wednesday evening. 6314 is actually a really brief policy. What it says is that the superintendent will implement a grading structure or process with the administration and inform the board thereof. So what we're proposing is to sort of follow the state guidance. The SDE has suggested that all grading for the final quarter of the school year be in a pass-fail structure. We've looked at that and we've gone back and forth, and we in fact believe that what we're going to do is follow the direction of a number of the universities. We plan on providing at the high school level for every student to have the option to choose not pass-fail, but pass or incomplete for any course on a course-by-course basis. In the lack of a request to shift to pass or incomplete, the students will continue to be graded with a letter grade. We have talked to teachers about grading, and we believe that the teachers are assuming a position that is more formative and less summative, that is grading with flexibility and creativity and compassion, and that what we're proposing to put in place is essentially a hold harmless choice for the students. If a student has received A's in any given class for the first 3 quarters and is now looking at a 4th quarter grade that could be coming out as a C, and the students have access to see the grades, we're not hiding anything, that student can therefore choose to take a pass for that course. She would have 3 quarters of A grades and a pass for the 4th quarter. The pass has no impact on the calculation of the end of the year grade. We were concerned, however, for students who are actually working really hard and doing well in this current situation. We were actually concerned for a student who's been struggling all year long and is now making up ground. So the reverse to that would be a student who has had C's for the first 3 quarters of this school year, is now actually doing well under the present circumstance and is scoring an A for the 4th quarter. That student may choose to take the A for the 4th quarter and in fact see his or her average improve before it's calculated for the final report card. Every student will continue to receive a letter grade for the year in every course that they've participated in. The pass and incomplete is for the 4th quarter only. We anticipate that seniors will have until July 1 to complete any outstanding coursework. And we anticipate that all other students will have until the close of the 1st quarter next year to turn any incomplete into a pass that they take on their report card. We do believe that that is the most reasonable and compassionate position to take around grading. At Baldwin and Adams, all 4th quarter grades will be calculated on a pass or incomplete, with the exception of Adams students who are taking high school level courses. A student at Adams taking algebra or geometry will have the same choice that high school students have. And at the elementary level, we don't provide grades. We do provide progress reporting against standards. What we'll be doing there is reducing the number of standards. Instead of reporting on 30 some odd standards, we're going to be reporting on a smaller number of higher level standards. And there's going to be a statement going home to the elementary parents. The progress reporting usually includes achieved a standard, making progress towards a standard, or needs more time to achieve that standard. We're sending home a statement that those reports during this period probably say more about the circumstances and the conditions your students are under, not about your students' ability or potential. We don't want a teacher seeing needs more time and reading that as failure for a 3rd grader. Everybody should need more time because everybody has missed time. So we're trying to help parents be okay with that reporting. But again, I'll have that for you in writing on Wednesday. In either case, it follows, I believe, in spirit, the guidance that the State Department put out. But I also believe that it's responsive to our community. We've already had some parents write to us and say, my child's working really hard and doing great work, and I don't want her pass to be the same as my neighbor's pass because I see those kids outside all day long. They're not doing any work and they want a differentiation. We looked at doing pass with distinction, fail and fail really bad, but that's just going back to letter grading. So we believe that giving the families and the students the agency to make a decision about how they're graded is the best way to help people feel in control during this crisis. But again, we'll have that for you on Wednesday. We'll have more time to go over that. In either case, the policy simply says that we'll have a plan and we will share that plan with you. So that one's going to simply be a local. I mean, actually, the policy doesn't need to be revised, although the grading policy will be revised, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul.
Well, how universal is the pass-fail?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question.
I'm wondering how that's going to be viewed, by colleges and things like that. If it's universal, I don't think there would be any problem or anything like that, but
yeah, so the state has recommended full pass-fail grading pre-K through 12 statewide.
okay.
we have found that most of the districts that we benchmark against are moving more in the direction of allowing the choice. And in fact, I honestly think after a number of conversations, a number of districts are moving in this direction. And a lot of their statements are going to look very much like the one that I've been sharing with them.
Okay.
Lyme Old Lyme is offering the choice. Haddam Killingworth is offering the choice. Madison is offering a similar choice structure. I know that Simsbury and Avon are offering a similar choice. I know that most of the big urban centers are implementing PassFail for all, and I have some concerns about that. We have local superintendents, and in fact, I need to give Ian Advisor a lot of credit for this. We've reached out to all Connecticut universities, and Ian's guidance department reached out to about 50 other universities. The universities are telling us that they will not hold a pass grade in the spring semester of 2020 against any applicant coming through in the next 4 years. I've got colleagues who are suspect of that, and I do worry when the big urbans are only giving pass-fail and somebody in an affluent suburban community can choose to still have an A show on their report card. But I've recognized that there are some things I just can't control during this process, and I feel like we need to trust what the admissions offices are telling us. It's my understanding, and the only one that I know of that is not going to at least a pass-fail option is Farmington. I believe that Farmington is continuing with only letter grades for all of their high school students. And I have the opposite concern about that. I worry about a family that's really in crisis and requiring somebody who's got illness in the family and their parents have lost a job to submit to a letter grade under conditions that just aren't like what we've graded in the past. So I know we're splitting the baby, but I'm referring to it as agency, and I feel good about that. We spent a lot of time looking at the college admissions piece. That was the big sticking point for a lot of us. Would a pass look worse than the letter grade? And in fact, again, the way that we've structured it, we're not requiring that choice until the last day of the quarter, and we're requiring them to go through their school counselor. In fact, because I want them getting the best advice. If taking the pass is not as advantageous to me as taking the letter grade, our counselors are ready to explain that to the families and the students who request it, so that they're only putting themselves in the most advantageous position.
Colleges are absolutely no issue in this. They're waiving it completely, if only for the most transactional reason.
They want to get their kids back in, right?
They're going to all be down on enrollment.
Yeah, they need to fill their dorm rooms next year.
But they're already suffering other things. They're already facing this with their own students. Some of them are going to universal pass. And so this is a non-issue for us.
And in fact, it's the way that I'm seeing a lot of the universities doing exactly the same. My two freshmen have both been told they can choose the pass-fail option per class. And so for Jonah, that's going to work out. He's been struggling with chemistry. Chemistry was going to be hard for him. He can choose to take a pass in chemistry. He's getting A's in his other courses. He can choose to take the letter grades there. So he'll have all A's and a pass rather than all A's and a C. So for him, it's working out.
That's interesting because to my knowledge, UConn is not doing that.
I'm not exactly sure what they're doing for their underclassmen right now. I know that there was, not underclassmen, but undergrads. There was a communication that came out from UConn around their ECE courses. Right now, both IB and AP courses are fine with the pass-fail option. We received a communication out of UConn that if you were taking an ECE course, you had to accept a letter grade. And it created a furor all over the state, particularly in those big urbans that were putting pass-fail in place for everybody for the fourth quarter. Well, UConn clarified and came back and said, we meant to say you have to have a letter grade for the year. Pass-fail is perfectly acceptable for the fourth quarter. But I have to admit, I'm not sure what they've put in place for their undergrads.
Yeah, Elijah's at UConn and he's still getting graded.
Taking letter grades?
Yeah.
I'm disappointed.
I am too. It's
I think the
difficult.
option, right? I mean, I think the option lets people feel like they've got a bit of control in the midst of all this. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, and we've had really good conversations about flexibility, creativity, and compassion when it comes to grading. We've had really good questions about what grades mean. I've been accused in a number of conversations at a number of different levels about submitting to grade inflation, and I don't care. I mean, right? All of our communications right now have said this is less about rigor and less about anybody's individual academic integrity than it is about health and wellness. And I believe that applies to emotional health and wellness. We're going to have a lot of kids on the edge of PTSD. We should not be contributing to that. We should be relieving that rather than being a contributing factor. We have to provide grades. I get it, but I think this is the most humane and compassionate and thoughtful way to do that. So that's my whole pitch for Wednesday night.
Sounds good.
I agree, because I think that to pit kids against each other, almost to make this a measure of how they tolerated this time, right? Like to say, well, you weathered it really well, you know, and so it reflects, I think it's so important to give them the option and take that pressure off of them.
And, you know, around the state, electronic tutoring is out of, you know, all over Fairfield County, there are teachers who live in one Fairfield community, but they're tutoring all the kids who live in the next community over electronically. And so, right, so to make this an opportunity for some, while others end up struggling just to be emotionally available or to be able to log in or to have a parent at home who helps. So that's where I feel bad about those students taking the pass. But I would rather see those students take a pass and not accept any harm than have to accept a D or a C, because if you're going to give everybody a letter grade, then you've got to have these benchmarks. And I can go on and on and on about whether or not grades are actually reliable and valid or objective. But I think that this is, at least in our mind, a hold harmless opportunity that we create. But somebody who didn't have a great first or second quarter can really focus and work hard and do better. I mean, we've seen time after time students who end up in home instruction actually sometimes doing better because the distractions are gone. So if that was going to be an opportunity for even a single student around here, why wouldn't we give them the benefit of that? So kids get to decide what works best for them, do it in consultation with their parents and with their school counselor. And I'm glad that everybody gets to pick whichever way works best for them. Sorry, Jason.
Go ahead, Jason.
No, I mean, that's important. And I appreciate, you know, you reporting on that. Going back to the list, if I may, 6340A is the use of web tools. The reason I put that down, in reading that policy and reg, I was a little concerned, not in the wording of it, but when they started talking about blogs and so forth in the regulations, I was wondering how they classified that. And I had, when I reviewed it with Paul, we had, you know, we started thinking about, you know, is a chat on Zoom, for instance, considered to be a blog? And I know it's a fine line, but we decided to just say in regards to 6340A, that we emphasize in that policy and regulation, what's already in there, that we're limiting the use of web tools to district approved platforms and applications. So, you know, there are a number of applications that the students are using, you know, with their teachers, but we wanted to make sure that somebody doesn't freelance and go and use something that's out there that hasn't been approved by us. So that would be a local decision based on Connecticut State Department guidelines as well. 6411 has to deal with PPT procedures. I'm sorry, that has to, this one deals with Connecticut State Department of Education guidelines. There was a revision that came out a few weeks ago that relaxed some of the timetables associated with PPTs. We just want to make sure that those guidelines are followed in district in relation to what is in 6411. 6426 relates to homebound instruction. That's a simple change. That would just be the simple adding of virtual homebound instruction. as a means to provide homebound instruction. So that would be a local decision to revise. On the last page, 6438 is work experience opportunities. I would ask that that is suspended for the duration of the shutdown in relation to providing our students with employment on a part-time basis during the shutdown. The last piece, the 9000 series, speaks to the bylaws of the board, and you'll notice that these are predominantly all aligned now, or should be aligned to a series of executive orders, 7B particularly, and 7C. The only one that is not is 9322, which comes to us as a CABE recommendation. 9322 is a provision in the bylaws of the board to suspend policy, bylaws, and regulations if needed. That kind of goes back to what Paul had mentioned earlier. If there was a failure to have a 3/4 vote of the board because of health reasons, he would work in conjunction with the board chair to amend policies, bylaws, and regulations as needed, most prominently through executive order. So that was the only one that would be a local change. And those are the items I have for you tonight before we speak to the action. Any questions?
Jason, I have a question, but again, it may be addressed in when you talk about the action items. It just was with regards to PPT procedures. And if we have students who are up for their annual IEP, review or PPT meeting, how are we rendering decisions that would affect, the coming school year if that can't get accomplished prior to, if we have outplaced students or students even in district who have special services?
We're holding PPTs currently in this format as needed.
Okay.
But the guidance from SDE has been not to hold PPTs and to roll existing plans forward. However, if there's an emergent need or an outstanding reason, then you would host PPTs electronically, just as we're doing now.
Okay.
So in most cases, we plan on meeting the existing IEP, rolling it forward, and then trying to do catch up and plan revision come September, which quite honestly, for a number of students would probably involve some sort of assessment or evaluation to sort of determine where they are. That could all also be mitigated by whatever opportunities we have in the summer. We're already beginning to hear that summer may be distance and not in person. So it's kind of a holding pattern for most, with the opportunity to do it like this, but as needed, and the state recommends as little as possible.
Which also, I think,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, what you had said in prior meetings about the budget and compensatory costs that we may be facing next year as these evals will go into the next budget season.
Right.
Yep.
Well, this is what I'm thinking. And if we can't either have these meetings, for these students, or because of this situation are identified to actually have more needs, right? And so that IEP or that 504 plan has to be revised. How do we accomplish that? And I guess in these kinds of meetings, but some of that's evaluative, so it's hard to know what we're going to be up against come September.
Right, and quite honestly, we don't know what our environment's going to look like in September. I don't know that I've shared this with all of you yet, but we're beginning to work on planning and some schedule design if we are allowed to return to schools, but with limited capacity. So if we return in September, but we return to split sessions where school days are now, reduced to 4 hours instead of 6 hours and 15 minutes, and you've got half the school coming in the morning and half the school coming in the afternoon, we do worry that we could end up writing IEPs the end of this school year. And then when you get to September, they're moot because we can't meet what we've written under whatever conditions we're returning to school in. So I think the idea of trying to just stick with the existing plans for as
Mhm.
long as possible, is so that we know what we're coming back to or what we need to design for those plans, either because of individual evaluation to identify how much ground was lost, or because we just don't know what schools might look like in September, and therefore you're going to end up doing all of them twice. You're going to meet now and then meet in September anyway. So
Right.
I
Okay.
think it's just better to hold off, but that's
No,
been
I
the
agree.
advice anyway.
Right.
I can tell you that I'm aware of 3 or 4 that are ongoing right now, however, because the students do have immediate needs and the PPTs are meeting. The coordinators, Jason, and special ed case managers are meeting with parents and advocates. It's just we're doing it like this, like we're doing all our meetings right now.
Thank you.
Jason, I had a question, if I may, around 4114. Are we still able to do other background checks? I mean,
That was going to be one of
what,
my questions.
you know, I mean, I understand the fingerprinting delay, but what other impacts in terms of background checks before we were to bring someone new into the district? Are there, or is that the only thing that we're going to be unable to accomplish in a timely manner?
We can still do a DCF review. We can still check the name and the teaching certificate with DCF to see if there's any complaints that have ever been filed there. I don't know if we can do a background check with name without fingerprints. We don't expect to be doing a lot of hiring during this time. And so
Right.
hopefully, again, before we return in September, we would hope to have the ability to do that. And I do know that other districts are asking the same question. If we can't get fingerprints done before September, how do we vet the new employees?
Right.
And so can we at least do a criminal background check based on name and teaching certification?
Okay.
I also wanted to note that health examination, you know, that's the standard health requirement we require before hiring somebody. I also believe that depending on what this return to, or what the opening the state task force comes up with, I'm going to imagine that there's going to be some kind of scaled return to school. And we may in fact have COVID screenings that are required of all students and adults in the building before they come back. But that speaks, the policy that we want to suspend just speaks to the regular health stuff that we do related to regular hiring, because nobody can go get a physical right now. I do expect that before we open, there's going to be executive orders or guidance about how to screen for temperatures or COVID before allowing anybody to come back into the school situation. Students and teachers will just follow the developments on that. I think the governor expects a report from that task force by May 20th.
I actually spoke with Pam Elleber this week, just our weekly meeting, and she had expressed that she's been in contact or has been talking with local health officials and doctors about what's going to happen, to Paul's point, in the fall regarding immunizations and you know, mandated tests that may be delayed because of the unavailability, I guess, of getting into a doctor's office. So more guidance is coming out in the next couple of weeks, I would assume, in that regard.
We may need to extend the window for just the regular MMR vaccinations because people aren't able to get in and see their pediatricians to get those right now. So we will follow all the guidance that comes out around that.
That was one of my questions on the heel of employees, but also students who can't get their physicals. So it would fall along that same guidance that we're kind of in limbo on, I would assume, right now.
Yeah, that's why I didn't include it,
Mhm.
because we haven't received the guidelines yet.
Yeah.
That might be one down the road that we're just going to have to update.
Yeah, this list we're looking at tonight is very much going to continue to be a living document. It is in no way complete or finished. It simply can't be. It'll change tomorrow. So when you look at number 1, then number 1 includes the 10 at the bottom of the page. I'm looking at the recommendations. Number 1 is really sort of a choice. So that pulls out the 10 policies that have been impacted by executive orders. And we've gotten sort of conflicting legal opinion on this. We can go ahead and suspend all those policies from now through the rest of the closing. In my mind, it's almost better to do nothing there, right? Obviously, an executive order has the weight of law it supersedes our policy. So if we just know that all of those policies are now not being implemented in the way they're written, they're being implemented in the way the executive order directs us to implement those actions now. What I like about not doing anything is that for the portions of the policy where the executive order is silent, then our policy continues to be controlling. So we're just saying that those policies remain in place, but we all recognize that the executive order for the duration of this closing has impacted them. To me, that seems like the best course of action. Now we can, if we choose to, go through and individually revise each one, or simply suspend all of them for the duration of the closing, because again, the executive order sort of supersedes what those policies speak to.
So I guess, do you want to run through the 4 action items and then we can vote on each one, or
Yep.
would you like to do it?
Yeah, sure.
piece?
So
Okay.
number 2 is a little bit different. Number 2 then are local policies that we've identified we're not following right now, mostly because of advice given by the SDE, but there's no executive order. So those are policies now that we know we are not following. We are violating at least a portion of each of those policies. In that case, what we would ask you to do is simply take an action Wednesday night that waives those 15, it's 16 policies, but I actually circled 6314.
Yeah,
because
let's pull
that one, that's the grading one. It's the one we've done the most work on, but we're actually not violating the policy. The policy just says that we will inform you of our grading practices.
We can cross that.
So I would think that we pull that one out, and then we ask you to simply suspend the other remaining 15 policies for the duration of this school closing. And then you don't have to go back and take another action. As soon as we get kids back into school, that act would therefore become moot, and all those policies would be back and in place in totality. If we believe anything's going to change permanently after this closing, or if we come back in a partial status, we'd have to return to that item and then go back and look at each of those individually and make revisions if we come back under a condition that doesn't allow us to revert to the original policy. That doesn't mean that we won't still be doing things that are talked about within those policies, but it's the simplest way to say that we won't be violating 15 of our own policies for the next 2 months. The option is that we can, if you prefer, look at each of the 15 and give you a specific recommendation, just give you the specific amendment to each of the 15. For some, it might still be, we have to suspend it completely, but for others, it might just be 1 or 2 sentences that need to be changed. And we can go ahead and do that if that would be your preference. I don't know if we'll have it ready for Wednesday, but we'll make every effort to have it ready for Wednesday if that's the choice. It would certainly be easier to do that if we choose to take no action on them. Well, no, I don't think it'll actually have a big impact. And then number 3 and number 4 are specific. We've gotten legal advice that the board should take both of these actions. I actually think that's cooling. I think there was more concern about this 2 weeks ago than there is today. Both of those talked about simply authorizing the superintendent to make more emergency decisions. In each case, we would prefer to include the line "in consultation with board chair." But number 3 would authorize me to waive any bidding procedures. Now, you have done that as a board periodically. We waive the bidding requirements. This would simply give me, in consultation with Katie, the emergency ability to do that. Again, I haven't seen an issue come up in the last 7 weeks where that's been a need. It hasn't been a necessity, but it's something we can consider. And then number 4 is actually broader than that. Number 4 is almost like the emergency authority that Matt declared. It would give me the ability to suspend any policy on an emergency basis. And again, I would prefer not to have that responsibility unless it includes the language "in consultation with the board chair." Now, Katie doesn't have the ability to act individually, but she could at least counsel me and say, no, that's really not a good idea. I certainly wouldn't do do anything along those lines without speaking to her first. Again, both of these seemed more urgent 2 or 3 weeks ago. They all feel a little less urgent today, but I don't think that it's a bad idea to give us that sort of flexibility in the next few weeks, or for the next few weeks. So those are the 4 recommendations. We broke them out as 4 separate acts. We thought that they were 4 buckets that made sense. And we can certainly talk about these because we can bring these to you on Wednesday evening in any way that you think you're most comfortable.
Can we go back to 414 and 4114 and 4118 again? Those aren't suspensions of the fingerprinting and the health exams. Those are just delays, correct?
Yes, yeah, we would not suggest that if we hire somebody today, we would never have them fingerprinted. Suspending the policy would allow us to start those people working. We would have to write hire letters, Jason, that would clearly say, right, your continued employment would be contingent upon successfully passing a background check at whatever time, or whatever date they became available. So we're suggesting suspending the policy. We would not, we would delay the fingerprinting, yes.
Yeah, John, that's state law. So whenever that goes back into effect and they're able to do that, they would have to go through the background checks.
Yeah, that was the only concern. That makes sense.
And again, that is sort of, we're doing that because of our policy review. We don't have any employees backed up that we're waiting to put in place right now. And it's an unusual time of the year to be making hires and running into the classrooms before July 17th or June 17th anyway. So I don't know that it will have an immediate effect unless we can't start accessing fingerprints all the way through the summer. If we stay in some kind of closed capacity, it will impact September, but I don't see it impacting the next 6 weeks or 8 weeks, whatever we have left.
I'm not on the policy committee, so I'm just going to make acknowledge that as I just raised this question about number 2, if I understand it correctly, which is the option for this committee to bring to the Board of Ed either approval of said changes in one fell swoop or suspending the policies. Is that number 2? And I'm sitting here trying to go back and forth and back and forth. Is there a danger in suspending some of these policies, meaning that other things unrelated to any concerns during this time are also suspended?
So technically, yes, although I'm going to answer no, because we're trying to just give ourselves the latitude for the areas that are impacted. We have no intention of declaring a policy holiday and not following the portions of the policy that stay in effect. But that's what we're telling you from our offices. As the governing board, you might have that concern, even though as the administrative actors, we're telling you that we're gonna do every part of the policy that we can continue to do. And that's where I said, if you would prefer, we can have those 15 policies broken out individually for you to say, this is what's changing in 1346, just these 2, the way we normally do. We're bringing it to you this way because we've got 26 policies impacted and we've never taken action on 26 policies all in one meeting. So
I'll ask a follow-up question and then I'm going to let the policy committee do their thing. Is there a way to create one document that lists the
Yes.
policies in number 2, gives a bullet of the change, and then says all other parts of these policies remain? So again, I'm not part of the policy committee. It will come to the Board of Ed. That sounds more comfortable to me as the board chair. I'm going to stop talking now.
Right,
I agree
because
with Katie.
yeah, I agree, because I was going to ask that same thing, because we've all had the opportunity to sit and hear the explanation behind all of these policies. And I feel like to bring it to the workshop and the rest of the board without at least giving them a line item explanation, it would be asking a lot of them to just give a blanket vote on that. So while I feel like we could make a blanket item vote, if that item spelled out like Katie said, bullet point wise, just a one-line explanation as to, or a few lines, whatever's required.
Is
Yep.
that something that's realistic for Wednesday?
I think so. No, I'm looking to Jason. Yeah, I just got a nod from Jason. So
Sorry,
yeah,
Jason.
no, what we
But
won't bring you a fully redlined
no,
policy.
no,
Right.
No,
no.
no, just
We
the
will
changes.
list, yep, each policy with a statement as clear as we can make it about what the change is. And then at the bottom, a statement that all other components of all the impacted policies will remain in place, and ask you to move on those together. So yes, we will
Mhm.
still ask to do it as one motion. It
Right.
will name 15 policies with 15 bullets underneath it, and we'll ask you to act on it in one piece.
That would be really helpful if
Yeah.
if you could
Yep.
provide that.
No
Well,
problem.
also, if we
I will
ever
go to-
got-
Thank you.
Right, and if
sorry.
ever the public came to us with a clarification question, we would
Yep.
just need to be able to, address that properly.
Agreed.
Yeah,
will
I think, and I really think for me, it's less of my concern about what the school district, the administration is going to do.
I understand.
And
No,
it's a perception issue that we as a board are retaining these policies, except for these instances, I think is a better stance.
I agree. Now, can I go back to number one? Number one, do we want to do something similar for all of the ones that have been impacted by executive order? Or is it okay simply to leave all those policies in place, knowing that we will appropriately amend them? Well, not amend them. We will appropriately implement them, recognizing that an executive order has precedence over your local policies. Is that clear? I mean, does that make that clear? Do
It
you
is, perhaps
Why
it's
don't
just
you
a,
just say that? Just say it, right?
yeah,
Yep.
Just say what you mean on number one as a preface to it.
Yep, we'll give you one statement for number one as
Mhm.
well, letting you know that we will continue to implement all of these policies in their entirety, except for those components that have been impacted by executive order.
That makes sense.
Yep, and we've drawn to your attention that each one of those 10 is some way impacted by executive order. But if anybody were ever to come and challenge a portion of that policy, we would defend our actions with the executive order rather than the policy for that.
Right.
Yep, you
That
got it.
makes sense.
All
thank
right, so
you.
that just leaves 3 and 4 then.
Paul, this is a question I thought of with this in regards to authorizing you to approve bids. I'm not wishing this upon you, but God forbid you were ever sick and incapacitated. Is there a measure with which somebody else, is it Jason or is it any, like, how do we? Yeah.
There's an existing policy,
Right,
well, it's an
right.
existing statute, actually. Every school district is required to have a superintendent of record. So if I was sick for a few days, then I'm just away, but I'm still the superintendent of record. If I'm actually incapacitated or if I am unavailable, then you as the board would have to identify an acting superintendent if we
Mhm.
know that I'm going to be away for a prolonged period of time. I would make a recommendation. It would obviously be Jason or Anine or unless I was going to be gone for a full year and you wanted to go out and get an acting or interim for some piece, but that's covered by existing statute right now. It would require an act on your part, and I'd probably need to provide you with a letter that said I needed a leave rather than just a few sick days.
Okay.
Or, or I was so sick that if I wasn't able to give that letter, you'd be able to recognize that I was incapacitated and name an acting superintendent. That would probably be one of your 2 assistants.
But that's not going to happen. So,
No.
but I just wanted to clarify.
Because nothing unexpected has been happening. Nope.
So does everyone feel good about those 4 proposed actions and how we're going to revise those first 2 a little bit? Does anyone have any other input?
I have a question. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So in both 3 and 4, where we discuss the possibility of not being able to convene a quorum, do we want to put any parameters on like time frame or anything? Like, I mean, you could say we need a quorum right this second. Is everybody available? And if we're not, you could make a decision. Like, do we want to define that again, just kind of to protect all of us and you, Paul, from the pressure of having to make that decision exclusive of the board?
So I hate to say it this way. I think the reason we're leaving it open is that let's say that things got really bad, and the reason that we couldn't convene a quorum wasn't because of I had to make a decision in 30 minutes and I couldn't get a hold of you, but because internet connectivity was down because Comcast couldn't staff their offices. So if you put a time limit in there of 48 hours, but then I can't get you together because we've lost technology or we've lost communications, then that time limit that is then that becomes part of the problem. So I think the reason that we've gotten this advice, and again, this all feels less urgent than it did a few weeks ago when the spike was just going up and not letting up at all. But I think I think there's no time frame because it's being wide open to whatever the circumstances might be. It might not be a decision that I have to make today, but it's a decision I have to make in the next week. And Connecticut lost all Wi-Fi service providers. If if we can't be together, and if I can't get you together, then we don't know what that means. That was my understanding of the recommendation anyway. Again, I'll have to say, I haven't seen a need for either one of these, and I don't anticipate a need for either one of these. If the board is uncomfortable with either one of these, I'm not going to be upset, heartbroken, or offended. They're here because they're recommendations from CABE and from Shipman and Goodwin. That's why they're in front of you tonight. I wouldn't have thought of these two on my own because I haven't seen a need for either one of these in the last 7 weeks.
Okay. Anybody else with any questions or clarifications on either the outline that Jason reviewed or these 4 action items?
Jason, going back to specific policy, I think it was 3718, financial obligations for students for lunches.
Yes.
What does the procedure look like to collect any funds from here on out? Is it a complete stop on it, or is there
No.
still an attempt to collect funds?
We will make every effort to continue to collect the funds, but what we don't want to do right now, that policy, and I think the run around graduation as well, they both include what the ultimate sanction would be. I think they're things like withholding of the report card, and for
Okay.
seniors, it's withholding of the diploma and walking at graduation. We'll continue to make every humane effort to collect. We just want to give ourselves the latitude not to put sanctions in place during this time.
Got it.
That actually, this is again, because this is like a moving, changing thing every day, but if and when we come back in September, there may be a lot more families that need the services of free and reduced lunches.
Yep.
And so just something to think about is, I'm sure you thought of this, but it just is something that's been weighing on my mind, is just that as the economic situations for families change, just making it as easy and painless as possible to allow for that in a dignified way. I don't know how we'll address that, but just, of the many ways that families are being impacted, it's just something to keep in mind.
No, you're really right. And often what we run into in Guilford is underreporting. What we run into in Guilford is families who don't want to sign up for free and reduced lunch because of a perceived stigma that goes along with that. Erica has done much, much better than previous directors in getting more families to take advantage of the service that's available. We'll have to think about communications and outreach. We'll have to probably lean on school counselors to make sure that we're reaching out and offering to families who might they've never been free and reduced before. They could benefit from it in September, but don't know that, or don't know how to take advantage, or don't want to take advantage of that. So yeah, we'll have to work on that come September.
Okay, great.
Right now, I think the board is aware that we've gotten permission from the state. We are now capable of serving those free lunches that we're providing to any resident of Guilford 18 years or younger, not just to any resident of Guilford 18 years or younger who has at least one sibling enrolled in the Guilford Public Schools. So we've expanded the ability to provide more of those meals during this period. And we're getting information about that out to the community as well. We're sort of rolling it out a little bit slowly because we're a little concerned about staffing and the impact, but we're rolling that information out to the community as well. Right now, we've had a few families ask and we were providing it to them without permission. Now we have permission to provide it.
Okay, great. Great. All right. Well, given that some of us may want to get on the Board of Finance meeting that's tonight. If
We
it's
need
all right.
Travel time.
Yeah. I guess what we're going to decide tonight or just vote on tonight is to move this forward to the Wednesday agenda. But given that we're asking some changes to be made to those action items, should we vote as a committee simply to move them forward based on the recommendations we've made tonight? Or
Yep, and we'll bring all 4 of them to you on Wednesday, adjusted to reflect this conversation and your suggestions here tonight.
okay. So per that, per the committee, can I have a motion to move forward these action items to the Wednesday workshop meeting for a proper review and vote by the full board?
So moved.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. So we'll do as noted here in the meeting. That is it for the, let me just review here for a second. Yeah, so that is really it for the meeting agenda, unless anyone else has anything else they'd like to bring forward.
Maria, you just need to call a vote on that motion in
Okay,
second.
great, sorry.
I'm assuming it's
So-
unanimous.
A vote for the moving forward of the proposed 4 action items, number 1, 2, 3, and 4, as noted in tonight's meeting.
Aye.
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 Okay, so it's noted that all committee members
Bless you.
voted. Sorry?
I just said bless you. Julia sneezed. I
Julia
just said bless
sneezed.
you. Oh, Moira froze. Moira, can you hear us?
She froze.
That was funny. For the first few seconds, I thought she was still looking at me.
I know.
And I'll just work from the worksheet that you have. I'll put the bullets right on there for you.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
And even though Moira seems to be frozen, do we have a motion and a second and then a vote to adjourn? Can we just get that for the minutes?
So moved.
Right. Second.
Got it. Mary and John